Now we got to talk about human reproduction. We had to pick a species as a model, and it might as well talk about our own. But there are a lot of different animal species out there, and so I may mention at times how we differ from other animals, but we're going to cover human reproductive anatomy and human sexuality. The reproductive system is responsible for producing, storing, nourishing, and releasing gametes and their products. Gametes are sperms and eggs. Um, Human sexual development starts in the womb. At about the seventh week of embryonic development, just after most women know that they're pregnant, the embryo makes a decision on whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. Actually, the embryo doesn't decide, it's the chromosomes that sort of make it look like a decision. If the embryo has inherited a Y chromosome, and we'll talk about this in the next unit in genetics, but if the embryo possesses a Y chromosome, the Y chromosome is a genetic switch that will cause primary male sexual features to form, which are penis, scrotum, testicles, internal vas deferens, and accessory glands. If a Y chromosome is not present, by default, the embryo will produce female sexual features, which include the labia, the vagina, uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries. At birth, females already have secondary oocytes from meiosis 1 waiting in their ovaries for puberty, while males in their testicles have no such spermatocytes. I mentioned that before, that was a difference. At puberty, what happens then is secondary sexual characteristics form. For girls, hips widen, breasts enlarge, body fat increases, and pubic hair grows. All of this in preparation for potential pregnancy. For males, muscles develop, the voice deepens, facial hair grows, shoulders widen, pubic hair grows, all preparing for physical fatherhood. Puberty is caused by hormones from the pituitary gland, which are in turn controlled by the hypothalamus of the brain. Way up here in the brain, behind your eyes, and about the middle of your brain cavity, you have tiny little brain parts, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Hormones from the pituitary are what interact with the gonads and wake them up and determine their behavior. So, the most important sexual characteristics we have are really our social characteristics, but I'll get to that in a minute. The primary characteristics are the things you're born with. I mean, we've had a big fight over this, the importance of these characteristics. In some states, if you have a penis, you cannot go into a girl's bathroom. If you're a female and you have a vagina, you cannot go in the boys' bathroom. Secondary characteristics are important. Deeper voice, thicker muscles, and facial hair allow us to recognize and distinguish females from males. Males typically don't have enlarged breasts, wider hips, and an increased body fat. Females have that. But really, the social characteristics are among the most important. Males usually wear their hair shorter. They behave differently than females. They usually wear darker clothing colors. Females have longer hair, brighter clothing colors, and behave differently than males. It's these two sets of characteristics that really determine how we interpret gender. So when you meet somebody at the mall, you're not able to see their primary sexual features. You are interpreting gender by secondary features that you can see through clothing and social features in terms of how people are acting, what clothing they're wearing, etc. So there is a great fight over the importance of all of these layers of sexuality. We'll have to see how this turns out. But really, it's your secondary and social characteristics that are more important than your primary in terms of gender recognition. Now, the male reproductive system. Generally, all mammals have these features that are possessed by human males. Testes begin development in the abdomen, but usually not long before birth, they descend from the abdomen down through a little opening at the bottom of the abdominal cavity, and they drop into a scrotum. And the theory is that the testes like to be cooler for sperm development or spermatogenesis. But there are mammals with, their testicles inside. Whales obviously don't have their testicles hanging outside their body. That would obviously be a swimming hazard. and they do just fine. And they have a higher body temperature than we do. Birds also don't have testicles hanging out of their body for obvious aerodynamic reasons. So it's really not quite clear why testicles for primates and for many ungulates and carnivores have to be hanging outside the body. Not exactly clear. Within each testis, there are massive tubes called seminiferous tubules. Those are the places where the sperm actually get made. The cells around the tubules make testosterone, which causes secondary male characteristics. So down here at I is where you find the seminiferous tubules. I is the testis. J is the epididymis, where sperm are stored over time. This long tube that comes up and goes into the body and then picks up products from the body, labeled K, that's the vas deferens, which is the tube that brings sperm from the testis out of the body during ejaculation. Then there's B, which is the seminal vesicle, and M, which is the prostate gland. These two glands are really important to fertility. They produce buffer and fructose food for sperm for when they leave the body. L is responsible for a lot of teenage pregnancies and a lot of unintentional pregnancies. L is the bulbourethral gland, which causes pre-ejaculation, which causes pregnancies. It's trying to make the girl pregnant, and it tries to keep that out of the control of the male. Let's see. Then there's E, which is the erectile tissue. That's what makes a penis actually enlarge. There is no muscle in the penis. It's just basically a balloon. That's how Viagra works. Viagra opens the artery that feeds the penis, and the penis simply gets large because it fills with blood, and the blood can't get out fast enough. G is the glans penis, which is the source of the male ejaculation reflex. And H is the scrotum, which protects the testis. So that's the male reproductive anatomy. Here it is kind of in color. Testis, the epididymis, which stores sperm, vas deferens, which comes around and inside the body, seminal vesicle and prostate gland, which produce the products for sperm motility and survival, bulbourethral gland for pregnancy. The urethra drains urine from the bladder during urination, but then also carries the sperm out during ejaculation. This is the urethra coming out here. This is the glans penis, ejaculation reflex origin, and this gray tube, that's the erectile tissue, corpus cavernosum technically, that makes the penis erect by engorging with blood. There's some non-reproductive parts shown here. The N is the anus and A is the rectum. For a male to get a prostate check, a finger has to be inserted through the anus, and then through the rectal wall you can feel the prostate. If there's nodules or lumps on it, it needs to be checked out because the prostate gland is the most cancerous tissue in a male body. I've already talked about these glands, so I don't need to go over those again. A male needs usually at least 100 million sperm per ejaculation to father a child. And ejaculation is basically an involuntary reflex of the autonomic nervous system. And it's hard to control, and that's why Cowper's or bulbourethral gland causes a lot of pregnancy. Most of the semen that comes out of a penis during ejaculation is not sperm. 99% of it is just stuff from the prostate gland and the seminal vesicle, and about less than 1% comes from the epididymis with sperm. But there needs to be at least 100 million per ejaculation to cause a pregnancy, because sperm, most of them die. I mean, they don't make it to the egg. So male fertility is related to both testicle function and accessory gland activity. If either one fails, a male is infertile. If a male cannot obtain an erection, he's called impotent, and that's what Viagra treats. Viagra cannot treat infertility. Viagra treats impotence. So if you're infertile, you may still be able to get an erection and have sex, but if you're impotent, you can't have an erection and have sex. So Viagra is for treating impotence, which is just it causes an erection. Sperm development is continuous once a male reaches puberty, and it usually goes on till the end of life. Sperm, they have a head piece which has the 23 chromatids in it, and then there's a mid piece which is the engine with all the mitochondria, And then there's a tail piece, which is just a flagella, which is for swimming. Sperm are absolutely tiny. They're stored in the epididymis and they're ejaculated out through the vas deferens. Now we move on to the female reproductive anatomy. The female reproductive anatomy, we start at T, right here, which is the clitoris. That forms from the same cells that form the penis. As a matter of fact, if the girl had been a boy, this is what would have made the penis. This is the site of female orgasm. The female orgasm reflex. It originates most of the time here. Going for reproductive structures, S is the labia, which protects the opening to the vagina and keeps microbes out, which is important. R is the vagina itself, which is acidic to keep microbe count to a minimum. P is the cervix, which is the base of the womb, and that usually is completely closed to keep all microbes from getting into W, which is the uterus or the womb. W is the site of embryonic development. X is the fallopian tube or oviduct, which carries sperm from eggs from Y down to the uterus. X also does carry sperm from the uterus up to the ovary. Sperm have to swim during ejaculation from usually the region of the cervix. They have to get through the cervix, get up through the womb, go up the oviducts, and get to an oocyte, which is up here in the upper reaches at the top of a fallopian tube. So Y is a ovary, which every month releases an egg. And usually only one ovary releases an egg at a time, but twins are not obviously uncommon. There are non-reproductive structures here. I forgot to mention in the male, this was also labeled. This is the pubic bone, which is the base of the pelvic ring there at the bottom of the abdominal cavity. And then there's an anus here at Q, and then there's a rectum here at O, which are not reproductive. And then there's AA, which is a urethra, and V, which is the urinary bladder. And you can see why babies cause moms to pee on themselves, because the baby's in the womb and it's laying right on top of the bladder. If the baby kicks, she's gonna pee on herself. It's almost inevitable. The proximity of the anus to the vagina means that hygiene is of utmost importance for females. If bacteria get from the anus to the vagina, reproductive tract infections can occur, and if they get up to the urethra, urinary tract infections occur, and both of those are hazardous to health. So in this color diagram, you can see the same structures: anus and rectum, not reproductive; urethra and bladder, not reproductive; the pubic bone, not reproductive, but then labia, vagina, cervix, uterus, oviduct, or the oviduct here, and then ovary are reproductive. Now, each ovary has about 400,000 oocytes in it when a girl is born. Once a month, an oocyte is released, prepared to finish meiosis if it gets fertilized by a sperm. Hormones cause that during the menstrual cycle to happen, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Egg release from an ovary is called ovulation. Cilia within the oviducts move the oocyte along towards the uterus. Fertilization is usually in the oviduct up near the ovary. And basically the cilia inside the oviduct push the fertilized egg back down to the uterus for embryonic development. So if I scroll down here, we got to talk briefly about the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is a cycle that prepares eggs for fertilization once a month. We know what happens. We don't know exactly why. I mean, you'll hear theories that the reason menstruation happens is to cleanse the uterus, but there are mammals that don't do that, and they are quite healthy. And right now, there are women that are taking that are doing hormone therapy, and they're only having a few periods a year, and they appear to be absolutely healthy. So it's not clear why the human body evolved to have 12 menstruation events per year. The answer's not in yet. It may come in during your lifetime. When a woman knows right where she is in a menstrual cycle is the beginning of menstruation. Once the uterus starts to bleed and blood appears at the vagina, you know you're right there at the start. of the menstruation period. Now that can last 3 days, it can last one day, and it can last like 5 days. It depends on the female. But menstruation basically sloughs off the inner lining of the uterus. When it's complete, the follicle phase begins. And at that point, the uterus starts to thicken. And during the follicle phase, an oocyte will enlarge in one of the ovaries. By day 14, about 14 days after bleeding started, usually the egg is releasing, or it's actually not an egg, it's an oocyte, is releasing from an ovary to prepare for fertilization. At that point, if it is fertilized, the egg will roll down in the uterus, it'll implant, and then it will release a hormone that will tell mom that it's there. If the egg is not fertilized, the female's body still for another 14 days, it will simply prepare for pregnancy. And if at the end of the 14 days from ovulation, okay, so if during these 14 days through here, no signal is received by mom's body, mom will then menstruate and she starts the cycle over again. Menstruates, and then the follicle phase, and then an ovulation, and then a luteal phase where she prepares for pregnancy. And if there's no pregnancy, it starts over again. So the menstrual cycle is summarized here, but I've already covered most of the details except for the hormones. During the follicle phase, estrogen levels are rising, and that's what thickens the uterus. Estrogen is a steroid, and it does target the uterine muscle to thicken. During ovulation, LH and FSH levels from the pituitary gland spike, and that's what causes the ovary to release the oocyte into the fallopian tube or oviduct. And then during the luteal phase, those hormones, the estrogen, the LH, and the FSH, they start to taper off, but another hormone called progesterone kicks up. Progesterone is what is the hormone that keeps the uterus in a prepared state for pregnancy. The progesterone is produced by the ruptured follicle that released the oocyte. That's called a corpus luteum, which means yellow body. If the egg is not, or if the oocyte is not fertilized, then the corpus luteum will disintegrate and the whole menstrual cycle starts over again. If the oocyte is fertilized, then the oocyte will begin cell division. It will roll down towards the uterus, and it will release a hormone called HCG, which will signal mom's body to not menstruate so that mom doesn't kill the baby by having a menstrual cycle. Now, in other mammals, instead of a menstrual cycle, there's an estrous cycle. It is confusing of why in humans, males cannot determine when eggs are present. Females cannot determine when eggs are present. In other mammals, like in this baboon, this really bright, tumorous, red-looking buttocks indicates to the male that there are eggs present, and this female is ready for mating. Obviously, we don't do such things. The estrous cycle, which is what most mammals, female mammals have, involve behavioral changes in the female, where the females become receptive to males, or there are physical changes like the red buttocks, or there are pheromones, which are airborne perfumes that are released by the female, which the male can smell to tell the male that there are eggs present. In humans, we are not aware of any behavioral, physical, or pheromone changes to communicate between females and males to indicate when eggs are present. The human menstrual cycle was obviously an adaptation for females to get pregnant at any time of the year, not only one time of the year. Because of the way we build our own structures, it may be better for some couples to have babies in the summer and other couples in the winter, whereas for most animals, all babies are born at the same time. On the African savanna, on birthing day, all the calves are dropping out of the female within about a 24 to 36 hour period. That's not the way human females work. Obviously, hospitals would have a disastrous time trying to deal with all the babies at once. Our birthing events are spread out throughout the year because of the way the menstrual cycle works. Now, if a pregnancy occurs, development proceeds. Development is divided into 3 trimesters. The first trimester is called the embryonic stage. It lasts roughly 8 weeks. It's not the full 3 months. It's not basically development's about 9 months, but the first 3 months is actually not the first trimester. first 8 weeks or so is first trimester, and then the second trimester is more like 4 months. And then the third trimester is about the last 3 months. The process of the zygote undergoing rapid cell divisions is called cleavage. The embryo at about day 7 attempts the most difficult task in its entire lifespan. It's called gastrulation. It must form layers. If it successfully forms layers, which are called the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm layers, it will then probably be able to be born. If it fails to form the layers properly, the embryo will die and mom will miscarry the baby. About 1/3 of all human embryos fail to get through gastrulation due to some chromosome problem or some issue, and as a result, then they die at some point after that because they can't form their body properly. So by the 3rd week, the nervous system has become deformed. The placenta is already there, allowing nutrient exchange. The embryo reaches just over 1 inch in total length by the end of the first 8 weeks. By the end of the 8 weeks, an embryo is then called a fetus, and it's just about 1 inch in length. By the end of the first 3 months, all organ systems are present, and the fetus is approximately 3.5 inches long, but it only weighs 15 grams. In the second trimester, organs begin further, or organs continue further development. By the end of the second trimester, the baby is almost ready to be born, except for the lungs. The lungs aren't ready to go. The lungs are the last organ system that go online and are ready for birth. So by the third trimester, the baby basically, the purpose of the third trimester is mostly to finish lung development and bulk up in size. Because at the end of the second trimester, the baby only weighs about 1.2 pounds, and that's not enough body mass to survive. The baby's body temperature will fluctuate too much, and it will die. So the third trimester, the baby goes from 1.2 pounds to maybe 6 or 7 pounds or more. But then the lungs actually complete their development so that the baby can take its first breath. Now, at about 270 days or 9 months, labor begins. And labor is 3 phases: dilation, expulsion, and placental phases. Dilation is caused by a choice by the brain. Oxytocin is released by the pituitary gland. That causes the uterus to contract and the cervix to dilate. When the cervix is dilated to the point where a nurse can reach all 4 fingers and get all 4 fingers through this space, then the baby can be pushed out. So before the cervix is actually dilated, if a woman starts to push, she can actually rip the reproductive tract and cause hemorrhage and death. So that's why there needs to be a midwife or somebody present during pregnancy to communicate with mom. So the cervix has to reach 10 centimeters approximately dilation before active labor begins. During dilation, a woman just has to wait. Contractions occur, the cervix dilates, the contractions get harder. Expulsion is where a woman actually squeezes as hard as she can and pushes the baby out. That usually doesn't last very long. Dilation can last almost a day or more. Expulsion usually lasts less than an hour, where rhythmically every minute to 3 minutes you're pushing with all your might to push the baby out of the body. Some doctors will do an episiotomy, and they'll take a scissors and they'll cut from the vagina towards the anus in order to ease the pressure on the vagina to allow the baby to come out easier. And obviously that makes it very difficult for a mom to sit down after childbirth. The umbilical cord has to be clamped once the baby comes out. Once the baby does come out, the last phase of labor kicks in, and that's the placental phase, where the afterbirth is born. And that usually occurs within 5 to 20 minutes after the mom pushes the baby out. That's a placenta right there that's been ejected from a uterus. And so you can see the placenta here is what the umbilical cord is attached to. The placenta is the exchange point for nutrients between mom's bloodstream and the baby's bloodstream. So next we'll go into birth control systems and sexually transmitted diseases.